This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
We were going for the summit, and the storm came in, clouds came in, there was electricity, so a lot of discharge of static into the rock that you can hear. It's like a Geiger counter, tick, 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 tick. Anytime you get higher than the ridgeline, you get zapped and you get knocked off your feet. Thankfully, we were on the shallower part of the mountain that we could land in the snow and not go tumbling down the mountain.
This is Delivering Adventure. Welcome to the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepard, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond.
In this episode, we are joined by Barry Blanchard. Barry is an internationally certified ACMG and IFMGA mountain guide. Barry is one of North America's premier alpine climbers. He's been guiding since 1981 and has guided on 6 different continents. Barry is also an author, and his book, The Calling, A Life Rocked by Mountains, was awarded the 2015 Boardman Tasker Prize for Mountain Literature. In part 1 of 2 parts, Barry Blanchard talks with us about what it takes to achieve an adventure. Jordy, do you want to tell us about Barry? I gather you know him pretty well. How are his first aid skills?
Well, Chris, Barry he's an icon. He's an alpine icon. I growing up and getting into guiding and climbing, he's passionate about what he does and exceptionally good at what he does. So if you take, for those of our listeners who have been to a rock climbing wall, let's say, and you're hanging onto a hold, well, you're pretty sure that hold is not going to come off because it's bolted to the wall in the climbing gym. But picture Barry climbing through all this rock, ice, and snow in his alpine career, and you can never be 100% certain that what your hand or your foot or your crampon or your ice tool is attached to is actually truly attached to the mountain. And Barry's just done an incredible job of navigating on his own adventures as a first ascensionist all over the place and all over the world, not just in the Canadian Rockies here. Winter and summer, navigating through all that and being able to hang on and not let go of stuff and have really, really precarious positions, trying to find protection in difficult places so you can climb safely through it, but knowing you probably still don't want to fall on that protection. That's basically Barry in a nutshell. And certification wise, he's been a mountain guide, fully certified, internationally certified mountain guide for a long time. He's been a mentor to me and to so many others in the mountain community. He's the first to share information. Lots of people in the mountains keep their cards close to their chest and don't really go out of their way to do any kind of sharing. And Barry, through, say, the Mountain Conditions Report that the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides puts out, he's just done an incredible job of sharing from the heart, his what went well and what didn't go well on a given climb to other members of our association, but also to the public. He just throws it out there. He's like, yep, that didn't go well, but oh wait, this went well today. In terms of first aid, Barry and I recently recertified our first aid training. We have to do that every 3 years to be members of the Guide Association here in Canada. And it was just great to spend some time with Barry. We were still out in the mountains, but not on the big peaks. And just to check in with him and see how he's doing through his time that he spent in the mountains. There's so many stories that come out from him, as you are about to see.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this, Jordy. Let's bring Barry into the DA studio and see what he has to say.
I just wanted to start out with, where are you now, and what have you been up to lately?
Right now, I am sitting in my house in Canmore, Alberta, and I can look over my right shoulder and see some of Lawrence Grassy Peak and Hauling Peak and a bunch of routes that I've actually climbed over there, both ice climbing and rock climbing. Have yet to do some skiing up in those drainages, but hopefully that'll come. I've had a huge change in my life in the last, I guess 9 months. It's almost a gestation. Last August the 8th, I was on vacation in Saskatchewan at my buddy's farmhouse, and I fell down some stairs and suffered a traumatic head injury that saw me in the intensive care unit in Regina for a week, and then another week plus of being in the hospital, and for some of that time being unconscious. I can't remember anything for a couple hours before falling down the stairs till 10 days after falling down the stairs. And then in February 22nd, it was finally my time to have 2 knee replacements done. So it's a year of recovery largely. And since last August, initially just learning to remember names and recognize faces was huge. And one interesting thing about that process was the first name that I recognized was my mother phoning me on the phone. It was the first time I'd recognized the name, and I said, "Oh, Mom." And that's interesting to me, that your mother is your longest companion in the world, So until one of you passes away and you start to have more time with another human being. But to this point in time, my mother has been there, longer than any other human. So that's really interesting. But it's been a recovery, and I haven't been doing my profession as a mountain guide since that time until 3 days ago. I went back out and provided some adventure with some British soldiers, with 2 other guides. And in terms of rock climbing, pretty novice level rock climbing. A lot of these, half of the folks had climbed before, some form of climbing. But the other half of the folks had never done it before. So the very first time. And it's the first time for a lot of those folks that are leaving the ground and climbing on natural rock and trying to figure out that. And that, for any human being, is a huge adventure. It's a test. And it definitely, I don't know. I don't really like the term pushes your envelope. I don't really like that. But it does test people, and it demands things of people that they haven't come up with before. So it's a form of evolution, personal evolution, and we call that personal growth, and write books about it and all that kind of stuff. But out there on the rock, it's pretty cool to see people, and not everyone is going to cotton to it. A lot of people are like, "That's it, I'm never doing that again. Glad I tried it once, but I'm not doing it anymore. It's not for me." But a lot of other people are like, "Wow, that was really cool. And yeah, I'd like to do that again." And one gal was phoning her boyfriend in Britain and saying, "When I get back, let's go to the climbing gym," and la la la, making plans. So that was pretty cool. And for myself, just being able to get back in the my chosen profession at even a very low level is baby steps, which is appropriate now. And where it started for me way back when, it was all baby steps. So.
That's great to hear that you're back in the saddle here and doing well. I'm also in Canmore too, just up the hill from you, where I'm recording, and Chris is in beautiful Whistler, BC. So we have a number of questions for you here. You're a storyteller, you're a longtime mountain guide. a lot of experience in the industry, and I think our listeners are really stoked to hear your perspective on a number of these things. We're coming at it from not so much the perspective of you're going to tell stories, and that is excellent. It's kind of the how you got here and where you're going with this in terms of your adventure in delivering adventure, which has been a lifelong adventure for you and a passion for you, we know. So we'll start with, how do you define adventure? It's a big question, but how do you, Barry Blanchard, define adventure? We're interested.
Yeah, my own definition of adventure is kind of part and parcel of what I've been called to. I call it a calling. The mountains called to me when I was a young guy in Calgary. I've described it as growing up on the hard side of the tracks, and it was an impoverished, poverty-laden upbringing, and there was a lot of challenges in my home life. And despite or through that time, and this would have been in the, I was born in '59, so a lot of this is the '60s and early '70s. I could see the Rocky Mountains to the west on the skyline of the city, and it pulled to me. And a lot of young folks, if you ask them what they want to do, they probably want to be a race car driver if they're guys, a race car driver, an astronaut, or a mountain climber. So, race car driving and being an astronaut weren't all that available to me. But the mountains, I could see them, and eventually got the chance to go into the mountains. And I started reading all the books in the high school library and drawing pictures of climbing and wanting to go climbing, and eventually got to go out and do it. And it's kind of taken over my adult life. And I like the term that the big wave surfers have, the people who surf in the big waves, like the big waves, and those waves are tremendously dangerous. And they have a term that says, you don't pick surfing picks you. And I think climbing is much the same thing. Mountains, they pick certain people that they want to come and, experience mountaineering. So with that template and that history behind me, my conditions or the way adventure works for me, and this is a lot of people won't understand this, but you don't get you don't get adventure without suffering. If you are going to West Edmonton Mall and getting on the roller coaster ride, or doing it in California or United States, wherever you do it, Callaway Park here in Alberta, you will feel an adventure, but there's a significant difference between, how uncomfortable you're going to be, and then also how much risk you're exposed to. So for me, suffering is a necessary part of adventure, as is risk. And the difference I would draw between the roller coaster ride and true risk is that the roller coaster ride is a thrill. You're not supposed to get hurt on the roller coaster ride. It does happen very, very occasionally, but it's not supposed to happen. Whereas mountains are real risk, and you can be hurt in a number of ways at almost any time. And coming to negotiate that risk and come to terms with it, and maybe understand it a certain amount, and therefore be able to adjust to it, is part of adventure. But you're never going to cover all of that, not in a mountain. No way. They're far too complicated and far too active. And it's weird to think of mountains as active, because most people look at a mountain and they think it's a postcard and you could carve it out of rock, which it is, but put it on your mantle shelf and it will never move. And that's not true. Mountains move. and they move quite quickly at times, and at certain seasons they move a lot. And a lot of people don't realize that mountains move. Yeah, that's part of the process. So adventure for me goes into that arena with the mountain. That you go to the mountain largely, I guess you could say on the mountain's terms, but you kind of go into the mountain, and the mountain has more influence over your situation than you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can definitely have an adventure with experiences, but you can also have experiences that don't have a whole lot of adventure associated with them. And for us as guides, we're constantly walking that line through that risk to keep our clients safe and move through to have an experience and an adventure, and hopefully all positive outcomes. But there is a certain amount of discomfort that can come with that. But there's the safety margins that we work within to keep everybody safe. But I find in current society, we don't experience a lot of discomfort. Kids growing up nowadays and adults, we kind of shy away from that discomfort. And that is where the adventure plays itself out, is having some physical exertion, mental, emotional exertion, and challenges there to make it an adventure. I totally agree.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's almost like I feel we've, as a culture, gotten softer over time, which I'm not enough of a scholar to really research, but I'm always kind of blown away and impressed by Conrad Kane, who made the first ascents specifically of Mount Robson, the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies, in the early 1913 or 16. And that was the first Alpine Club of Canada's annual general camp. And the railway had been opened up, so all these people came from Winnipeg and all over Western Canada and the United States, and took a train ride, got off the train, and went and Kane guided McCarthy and Wasborough up Mount Robson and made the first ascent of Robson. And it's interesting, Conrad Kane at that point in time, probably the last person to ever be probably the best alpinist in North America while being the best mountain guide in North America. That combination has probably never been touched again because there's been segregation that way. But I'm rambling. But in 1924, the Alpine Club of Canada had its second annual general camp below Robson. And Conrad Kane guided the south-southwest buttress of Robson, which he would have ridden a horse to Kinney Lake. But then he would have ascended 8,000 or 9,000 feet of complicated mountain. He guided it 4 times in 2 weeks. The physicality of that, presented to the modern guide, is a little hard to understand, because that's pretty much, we'll round the numbers, 10,000 feet up, 10,000 feet down. Make it 20,000 feet. That's 80,000 feet of ascent and descent in 2 weeks. The first 3 times he never made it to the high camp and bivouacked on the glacier. And one of those people he took to the top that time was Phyllis Munday, the first woman to get to the top of Robson. And just the physicality of a guy up there with a meter-long ice axe, a tweed suit with a tie, and all his clients in that same rig, and then sleeping on a glacier for the first 3 times. Yeah, you tell the guides today, and they don't believe you. They were tough people.
Totally, yeah. And dealing with nowhere near the equipment that we have nowadays too, right? And communications and safety nets and all those kind of things that we enjoy. Even though we feel like we're kind of far out there, we're not, compared to how these early mountaineers were doing these things. I've seen a poster where it lays out what they carried with them for clothing and in their pack compared to what we do nowadays for a similar type of trip. And it's just stunning how much more stuff and tech we have and what they did not have. And they did these huge feats of of physicality to get their clients up there, and just over and over and over again during these general mountaineering camps. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I recently watched a film about the Swiss guides, and something that if I have known, I had forgotten. With all those ascents, like Edward Foyt's doing like I think 100, over 100 first ascents, very first mountain ever climbed by, there might have been natives on some of them, indigenous folk that we don't know about, but for recorded record that we know about, the very first time these mountains had ever been climbed. And, his other associates during that time, of which Kane would have been one, although I think Kane was Austrian and not Swiss, so it's probably an important distinction. They didn't have any fatalities. All those ascents, basically safe ascents. I'd have to read about broken ankles and stuff, but that's amazingly impressive, and yeah.
So that's a nice historical perspective. And why do you think we need to be able to deliver adventure to ourselves? Why is that important?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it's important for certain people. I think for a lot of people are like Bilbo Baggins. Adventures, nasty things. I don't really like them. And a lot of people, don't really want to have adventure. They don't want that discomfort and that fear and that risk. Whereas some people do. And, as mountain guides, we all are obviously on the we do side of things. We do like adventure. And I think it's important to provide adventure to ourselves, because it's our testing ground. It's where we can test ourselves. And, that was Walter Bonatti who said that, how much metal a person has in them. And it echoes a line I read in a book about a Norwegian fighter in the Second World War had a conflict with the Germans and ended up hiding in the high plateau of Norway and surviving through the winter. And then the local people, the Norwegians, got him down into the fjord, and he's going to be rowed across this fjord. He's got frostbitten feet, and he interestingly recovered and came back to being, fighting the Germans in Norway again. So interesting guy. But these two men who are going to row him across this fjord, one is the guy's father, who's in his 70s, if not 80s, and this Norwegian fighter says, are we going to be able to do this? And this guy who's in his 80 years old, he says, son, I was born in a time when men were made of, ships were made of wood and men were made of steel. And he just started rowing and rowed all the way down this fjord and got this guy out. And feet in cold water, whole thing. He was a cod fisherman his whole career, his whole life. But I just love that thing. Ships were made of wood and men were made of iron. Tough people. Yeah. So, I think it's important for us to have adventure, because, it's a way of seeing how much iron we have and having that iron evolve over time, because we get better at it and more capable with it, and we understand more for a certain amount of time. And then, you go down the back slope and see what you're capable of as your iron gets less and less. But to have that guy's iron, man.
I thought we covered a lot of ground in this podcast when we started, but I never thought we'd get a Bilbo Baggins reference.
Looking at your career of adventure, which has been quite long and well-rounded, what do you, and this might be difficult for you to come back with us with one answer, but what's one of your biggest accomplishments that you feel you've done to date?
I think one big accomplishment that I will say was our attempt on Nanga Parbat. And Nanga Parbat is the 11th highest mountain in the world. So it's one of the 14 8,000 meter peaks. But more importantly, and this is a bit of a geographic distinction, the Rupal face of Nanga Parbat presents the most relief from where you are standing in the valley floor to the summit of the mountain, the escarpment. And there are geographic definitions of all that, which I have read about, but I don't hold in my head, especially after banging my head. But the Rupal face, you're in the top Alp Meadows. The summit is 15,000 feet above you. That's the highest mountain relief of one sweep of mountain anywhere on the planet. Doesn't get any bigger than that. There's some other really big reliefs that go down into rivers and stuff, but this is one sweep of mountain going up. So it's the biggest one in the world. It's the most climbing you can do, starting, at our base camp, and the three of us, myself and Kevin Doyle and Mark Twite and Ward Robinson, we put all this stuff on our back. We believe in the traditional definition of alpinism, which is all you get is the pack on your back, a rope, a rack, and a pack. You don't get to establish camps. You don't get to fix line all the way up the mountain. You don't get to use a helicopter. You put it on your back and you engage with the mountain and you try to make your way up the mountain. And hopefully the mountain allows you to make it to the summit. Another word I hate is conquer. It's, I don't know. It's hubris. It's hubris and it's idiocy, because we are allowed to go to the top of these mountains, and that is kind of a blessing and a grace. It is not a conquer. No way in. That doesn't happen. Anyways, that attempt, and we didn't make it to the top of that mountain. Nanga Parbat didn't let us get up that time, and it actually slapped us down pretty hard. And we came into a fight for our lives, and we were very capable at that period of time. We were all in our late 20s, early 30s, and we were very strong, capable guys, and we fought really, really well, and we made it down off of Nanga Parbat in quite a long, trying storm. And maybe we actually even made another attempt, but Nanga Parbat didn't want us on top again. So we didn't have to get slapped that hard twice. So we ran away. But it was a great attempt, and it was a great experience, and it was a massive adventure. One of the biggest adventures I've had in my life, with three gentlemen who are still, some of my best friends, my best friend Kevin, and then Mark and Ward are also, I love those guys. And when I had my head injury, Kevin came out a number of times, but Ward came out from the coast to visit me twice when after my head injury. And Mark would have come, but had himself busy, but he definitely communicated. So I guess the other side of the importance of that adventure, why that's a great accomplishment, is that bond. The four of us, we'll never be separated. We live in vastly different areas, but there's a connection there that'll never be broken. So, yeah.
When you're in the mountains like that and you're sleeping on your rope and you're or not sleeping because you just got to keep going, and you're starting to run low on food, and there's spindrift avalanches and rockfall and all that stuff associated with the big and the smaller mountains. It's those bonds that you form that are really the things that are the memories that you come back with. Absolutely. So if for our listeners, if you're interested in delving more into Barry's story about climbing there and other adventures and Barry's life, he's written a book called The Calling: A Life Rocked by Mountains. And I won't ruin it for you, but it basically plays like a mixtape. And for those of you that I'm kind of dating myself here, who made mixtapes and went on road trips and had adventures, it's hang on, it's a wild ride. It's a great book.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordy.
Can you think of an adventure that you've had that's really pushed your skills?
Yeah. There's several of them that came to mind. And I think it was, I'll mention 3 adventures that really pushed me. Were the Andromeda Strain, the north face of Mount Alberta, both of which are in the Columbia Icefield here, very close to my home. And some of the, especially Alberta, one of the really big and independent mountains in the Canadian Rockies. And Alberta's probably overall for human beings one of the most difficult to get up. And then also Mount Kefren, which is close to where I live. And looking back on those, like Alberta or the Andromeda Strain we climbed, we did the first ascent of a route that had never been climbed before. It was quite challenging, and it happened in April, and then Alberta happened that summer. And with both of those ascents, and the math on the Andromeda Strain that I went to with Dave Cheeseman and Tim Friesen, for one, it was my 3rd attempt on that route, and for 2, I had amassed 700 days of climbing at that point in my life. So some of those ascents in those 700 days had been a very trying ascent of the Cassine Ridge of Mount McKinley with my partner Kevin, and also climbs in Yosemite Valley like the Nose and the Salathé and Half Dome, these real classic wall climbs, and also a period of time in Chamonix in France, all within about a 3-year period where I gained all these days. And that was my carpenter's kit, my toolbox, all right? And it was a pretty good toolbox, but there's more that could be added to it. And there never is enough tools in a toolbox to go out and climb on alpine mountains. You'll never know enough, or you never have enough. But on those 2 ascents, they demanded everything I'd learned in those 700 or 750 days by the time I got to Alberta. They demanded all of that, and they asked for more. So I had to come up with more. I had to go past and above my definition of myself. I had this definition of myself. This is what I'm capable of. Those mountains and Kefren 2 years later asked for more. They demanded more. We weren't going to make it unless I came up with more. And I came up with more. And some of that involved, risk, times that a fall probably wouldn't be lethal, but you definitely get hurt, and you could be hurt quite badly. And I was able to hold it together and come up with whatever I needed to come up with. And the mountain said, okay, you can continue. And continuing, that's just a meter. That's like the mountain in those situations says, okay, you can make it up this next meter. And maybe that's the hardest meter on the whole thing, but those are the kind of increments we're talking about. We're not talking about 100-yard dashes or making the record of the mile, driving in Monaco for Grand Prix or anything. We're talking the next meter, right? And just as a sidebar, climbing's really interesting in that respect, in that it is a very static, calculated. Sometimes it has to be quite fast. You have to move quickly or you're going to fall. But most of the time, there is time to try to make A plus B equals C. And the really challenging parts were in those ascents, all three of them, when I didn't have time to come up with that equation. I had to move. I had to move like a wolf, go with my instinct and my reflexes and my, I guess, reaching and going. Go with the flow. And they added up. So yeah, all three of those were really trying ascents that way. And the wild thing, which was a winter ascent, I remember I led a really challenging pitch for myself that my buddy Kevin had led before me on one of the previous attempts. The wild thing took 5 attempts, 15 days of my life to get 3 days up there. But I did this, snow filled off with, and got up there. It was 25 below. It was cold. It was clear. And there's a good crack, and I'm hammering in a couple really solid pitons, and they're ringing true. It's a good anchor. I'm feeling, God, I did this. And one of the pitons didn't go all the way in, so I tied it off. I shortened the leverage on the piton so it couldn't be broken. I remember my buddy Ward getting up, and he looks over, wow, you tied off that piton? Because, it's an acknowledgement that Ward would have just clipped the outside of the piton, which probably would have been fine. But tying it off made it even a little bit safer. So, yeah, those were days that definitely tried me, those 3 ascents. Yeah.
So you touched on a number of things there that allowed you to make that happen. Obviously your knowledge and skills up to that point, your experience. You mentioned patience. What else does it take to deliver adventure to yourself?
Well, it takes the desire to go up and have those adventures, to want to go into that place. And for myself, that is alpinism. That's my real calling in the bouquet of things that you can experience as a climber, some of which would be gym climbing these days. And I enjoy gym climbing. I really like going there. Some of which would be safe rock climbing, some which would be more risky rock climbing, some which might take your rock climbing to the biggest rock faces in the world. But for me, it's alpinism. So snow, ice, rock, glaciation, kind of as complicated as it can get in the mountains. And the things that you need to go there is, I guess, for an alpinist is, I guess you could call it a passion, a love, a respect, a need to go across a glacier, come to a bergschrund, the big crevasse that divides the mountain, which doesn't move as fast as the glacier, except when it does decide to move, then it can move very, very fast. But the glacier is constantly in motion, and it makes this big crack. And glaciers are more dynamic overall than mountains. They move more because they're moving all the time. So to go up the glacier, get to the bergschrund, step over that bergschrund, then you're on the mountain. And for me as an alpinist, that is a step into a special and sacred place. That is, I call it my church, that's where I really connect with the Creator. Whatever has put us and the universe, well, stupid to say us and the universe, put the universe together, that's where I feel it. And that's where I connect with it. And that's where I want to go. And that's where I want to have myself grow. And part of that growth is the risk, because it is a risky endeavor. It's very dangerous to be on these sides of these mountains. And then also, you're not going to get up there without some suffering. Even on a blue sky day, physically, it's going to take a lot of effort. There's going to be some pain involved to keep climbing up these mountains. So yeah, Wojtek Kurtyka, a Polish alpinist, quite an interesting guy. He called it the art of suffering. And if you read Kurtyka's writing about the art of suffering, it's, I don't know, you could almost call Kurtyka a mystic. That he definitely has a deep connection with the mountain.
So you mentioned suffering, can you think of a situation that really tested your motivation to push through suffering? And adding on to that, in that situation, how did you manage to do that?
Yeah, there was, something I was at my tether for suffering on the North Ridge of Rakaposhi in 1984. And Rakaposhi isn't as much relief as Nanga Parbat, but it's pretty close. It is in the Karakoram Mountains, which is quite close to Nanga Parbat, which is actually in the Himalayan mountains. So there's a geographic distinction between the Karakoram and the Himalaya, although we often just call it the Greater Himalaya and include the Hindu Kush, which is a range that's quite close to those two other ranges. They actually come together. But Rakaposhi is one of those ones where there's a river down there that's 5,000 feet, and you go by that river, and then the mountain that you want to climb is 25,000 plus feet above you. So there's 20,000 feet of relief. So you don't climb it all at once. You only climb, the top 12,000 or 13,000 feet. But we'd gone there as a group of 7 climbers and a doctor. One of our partners on the team didn't acclimatize well, so he chose to leave. So there were 6 of us who went onto the mountain. And once we committed to the mountain, and we were using 2,000 feet of rope, and it was our first time over there. We didn't think we had enough ability to just go alpine style with a rope and a rack and a pack on your back. And no one's climbed. Is that true? Maybe someone has climbed Rakaposhi from the north in that style. But I'd have to think about that and go back and research it. But anyways, we committed to the mountain. We were on the mountain for 23 days. We never came back to the ground for 23 days. We went higher and higher until a storm stuffed us, and we came down. And it was kind of like leaving the planet. You could see the planet down there from up 24,000 feet on Rakaposhi, but there was no way you could get there. And there's no way that anyone could come and get you back. I don't think they could have done a helicopter landing at that point in time with the people who were flying over there, and which is a diss on the Pakistani Air Force, who have done higher rescues now with helicopters, or maybe not higher, but have done some. But anyways, yeah, it felt like you're on a different world. And we came down, the weather came right after 2 weeks of storms, and myself and Kevin Doyle and Dave Cheeseman were able to go up. And in 5 days, we climbed to our high point. And then on the 5th day, we were going for the summit. And the storm came in, clouds came in, there was electricity. So a lot of discharge of static into the rock that you can hear. It's like a Geiger counter, tick, 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 tick. Anytime you get higher than the ridge line, you get zapped and you get knocked off your feet. Thankfully, we were on the shallower part of the mountain that we could land in the snow and not go tumbling down the mountain. And it was just really trying. And the summit's still so high above us, and we're laboring up through this snow and trying to find ways to outthink the snow, to sink less in the snow. And, I'm out front, and Dave comes up to me, and it's like, Dave, this is an empty experience. This doesn't mean anything anymore. This is, I think I said, this is stupid. We should just go down. This has no meaning. And Dave's like, yeah, man. He was South African. Yeah, man, I think we should go down, man. This is too much, man. And then Kevin came up, and Kevin, the day before, in our tent had been what we call butt sick. And butt sick is some kind of gastrointestinal infection that you get in Asia as a Westerner. And, the night before he was clinging to his harness, he'd taken it off and he's crouched down, and there's like a garden hose of pressure exploding out of his anus. And it's horrible to think about, but that's what happens. It's like 100 bazillion bacteria and virus and whatever else is coming out of their little paramecium, all this stuff that's trying to kill you, basically. And he's hurting bad, and he's been dragging his butt kind of coming up the mountain because he's hurting. And we know he's hurting, so we're doing all the work, breaking the trail. And he comes up to us, and Dave and I said, yeah, we should go down. And this guy, has a prize fighter's heart. Someone like a Muhammad Ali heart. You don't come around many of those. And this guy pushed water uphill. He just said, come on, guys. No, we can make it. We got to keep going. And he pushed water uphill. He got David and I to keep going uphill. And I don't know, an hour later, we're below the summit of Rakaposhi. It's 10 feet above us, 5 feet above us. We're tempted to go up and touch it, but we can hear the electricity ticking into the summit of Rakaposhi. And then we know if we go up and touch it, it's going to be... So we just stood there and looked at Rakaposhi, took some pictures, and we went down. And that's one of the times I had convinced myself it was time to quit. But my buddy Kevin wasn't having any of it. So up we went.
Thanks so much for this, Barry. We're going to pause here now so that we can recap some of the excellent points that you've made so far. If you're looking to learn more about Barry, you can check out his book, The Calling, A Life Rocked by Mountains. It reads like a mixed tape. That's how he's named the chapters, and I'll say no more. But yeah, music is a passion for Barry's, and it's interwoven throughout his book. If you'd like to go climbing with Barry, you can find him guiding and instructing at IMFGA Mountain Adventures in Canmore, Alberta.
Well, Jordy, what were your takeaways so far? What does it take to achieve adventure?
Well, Chris, Barry highlighted that adventure often, not always, but often to be an adventure, it has discomfort. And he linked adventure with the elements of risk taking, struggle, and discomfort. And the way he highlights it is that having an adventure, there is a bit of a cost to that. You are paying a price, and that often involves feeling a degree of discomfort, fear, effort, or challenge. And the reality is life isn't easy. It's its own adventure, and adventure in the outdoors is not always easy. There's parts of it that are pretty cruisy, but in order to feel challenged, stepping up and putting yourself out there a little bit and feeling a bit of this idea of discomfort. I think in society generally nowadays there can be a lack of that. I think for kids growing up, I've got kids myself, and it's a pretty there's always struggles, but I think what parents often do nowadays is the goal is for the children not to experience discomfort in any way, shape, or form, whether it's hunger or lack of school supplies or all that kind of stuff, right? That, and it really, if you look back through history, the people who have experienced discomfort have often been, kind of at the forefront of society because they know how to deal with that adversity. And I'm not saying that you want to go out and throw yourself to the wolves all the time. And that's not fair to the wolves because wolves actually are quite friendly. But that idea of, you don't want to constantly be walking on beds of nails to make your feet harder, but you do the big days in the mountains and your feet will get tougher. And the only way you get up there is under your own power. And there's discomfort related to that. And a huge sense of accomplishment. Barry also talked about personal evolution And with that evolution is that there is a degree of risk taking and suffering. Potentially, if you've seen Cedar Wright's episodes that he's filmed, his movie documentaries called Sufferfest, highly recommended. And you don't necessarily need to take it to that level where you're biking from venue to venue across the desert and you're not a cyclist, and then you climb stuff and you realize that it's more difficult than you thought it was going to be, and you're just beat down from the cycling side of things, like Cedar's experience there. But you also, you evolve as a person through having these adventures and having some risks that you're taking that are hopefully fairly calculated because you've prepared for what you're doing.
So, Jordy, I totally agree with you. Adventure is a necessary part of life. I think we touched on this in our first episode together. And I really liked how Barry linked that with our personal evolution. But just to add on to what you're saying, one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and he kind of finished off with this point at the end, is the fact that while adventure is a very personal thing, we often need help from others to be able to achieve it. And that help, sometimes it comes from coaching, sometimes it comes from modeling, sometimes it comes in just someone trying to inspire you through their words, or, I give pep talks to my people every now and again, and to myself sometimes. But we often need that little bit of push. And an example is just following somebody, down a mountain or up a mountain or through life. That person ends up becoming our guide. And in the example that Barry used, he was climbing Rakaposhi. They were wearing down in the group. There was a lot of hardship. They felt like they couldn't go any further. And all of a sudden, one of his colleagues stepped forward and motivated everybody to keep going. And delivering adventure, that's something that we do for ourselves. But if we want to achieve it, we often need others to help us in that process. And if we can help other people to achieve adventure, often we end up providing them with some of the most valuable experiences of their lives. Now, let's turn it over to you, the listener. What were your takeaways? You can share your thoughts, stories, and insights with us via our social media feeds or by emailing us. You can find all of our contact information at deliveringadventure.com and in the show notes. We've also posted Barry's links and info about his book in the show notes as well. Next up is part 2 of Barry Blanchard's interview. If you like this episode, you absolutely don't want to miss the next part. In part 2, we ask Barry to talk about motivation, bear encounters, and his aspirations for his legacy. Please don't forget to click the follow or subscribe button for this podcast in your favorite player so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with your like-minded friends so that they can enjoy it too. Thanks for listening, and get out there and deliver adventure like a pro.